Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Douglas Kilmer, and I'm president of the United States National Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, or as we're known in the United States, US ICOMOS. Every year for a long time, we've had an international symposium and conference. This year, of course, 2021, our event will be virtual. The theme for this year's conference is preserving world heritage in a changing climate. Climate change is the dominant issue, in the ICOMOS Triennial Scientific Plan. We will address this issue today and tomorrow. Today we begin now at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and we will continue until 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time today. Tomorrow, we will also begin at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and conclude at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now, today we have two very interesting and relevant sessions. The topics will be first, assessing climate change impacts at World Heritage Sites. And the second session will deal with managing climate change effects at World Heritage Sites. Now, at the end of each session, there will be time for discussions, questions, and answers. So please enter your questions, if you would, in the chat box, and we will take them in order. There are many climate change impacts. The more we look, the more we find. Of course, that includes inundation of sites and alteration of coastal ecosystems, of course. But there are climate change impacts on environments far inland as well. We can see this by the increasing intensity and frequency of fires. Many in places that have not burned before, not to this degree, or in many cases, not ever before. And those places in particular do not have the resilience of areas that have predictably experienced fires in the past. Predictability is also declining. There's, of course, nothing like meeting in person, and we really look forward to that. But we find compensation this year in the participation of, I mean this sincerely, premier luminaries in the heritage conservation and preservation world. Now, this first day, we are incredibly honored to have United States Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, deliver our plenary address. Secretary Haaland made history when she became the first Native American to serve as cabinet secretary. But throughout her career in public service, Secretary Haaland has broken barriers and opened doors of opportunity for future generations. And believe me, we need this. This is essential. She was elected one of the first Native American women to serve in Congress. She was the first Native American woman to lead a state political party in the country. She's a member of one of my favorite places, beautiful place, the Pueblo of Laguna, and a 35th generation New Mexico. Having said that, it's my great pleasure and honor now to welcome Secretary Haaland. Madam Secretary, please,
Thank you.
Please take it from here.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm so appreciative. Gawatsi, Haupa, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deb Haaland, Secretary of the United States Department of the Interior and proud member of the Pueblo of Laguna. I'm grateful to the International Council on Monuments and Sites for inviting me to speak at this year's virtual symposium. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway people here in Washington, D.C. Many may think that land acknowledgements are a new custom, but the practice actually dates back centuries in many Native nations and communities. Land acknowledgements recognize the Indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the lands where we live and work. As the globe faces the existential threat that climate change poses, the recognition of the Indigenous stewards of our land, air, and water, and the topic of this symposium could not be more relevant: climate change and preservation of world heritage. Your focus today aligns strongly with our mission at the Interior and with President Biden's goals for the United States in this pivotal moment. I'll start by giving a brief overview of how we at the Department of the Interior work to preserve world heritage in the face of climate change. Unlike many countries' ministries of the Interior, the United States Department of the Interior has a mission that is in common with other countries' ministries of environment, climate, natural resources, science, Indigenous affairs, and culture. Our department's roles on culture and nature are deeply interconnected. In fact, part of our mission calls on us to protect the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage. Through efforts such as the World Heritage Program, the department works in partnership with other countries to preserve and share our nation's and the world's cultural and natural heritage. We're proud to host workshops that bring World Heritage Site managers together to share ideas, best practices, and to plan for the future. Heritage is an essential resource for living cultures and human identity. As the first Native American Cabinet Secretary for the United States, I come to the table with a deep respect and profound connection to cultural sites across the country. I applaud the U.S. ICOMOS recognition that climate change adversely impacts cultural sites everywhere. Identification, preservation, management, and sharing of our cultural heritage on public lands helps tell our stories, and telling those stories helps us to be better public servants and build a more inclusive future. It's my goal to make sure we're telling the whole story of the United States by preserving cultural sites that reflect all perspectives, including communities that have been underrepresented in the past, and making sure that we build on, learn from, and react to what came before. We help give those communities a voice. We retell and elevate their stories, and in many cases, we help people to understand hardships of those groups and the origins of inequity. These special places can make people feel, laugh, and cry. These special places can make people care. President Biden demonstrated his commitment to preserving sites that are culturally significant when he took profound action to permanently protect Bears Ears National Monument a few weeks ago. In my culture and in many Indigenous cultures around the world, we are taught at a very young age that our actions impact not just ourselves, but our entire community, and thus the generations that follow. That deep understanding grounds much of the work we do at Interior, but none can be more pressing than the climate crisis. Right now, we're in a pivotal moment in which communities across the globe face harsher storms, longer droughts, more intense fires, and extreme heat and cold caused by climate change. This is a moment that calls on us to recognize that climate change impacts every person on this planet, but not every person on this planet has the same access to life-saving resources or the ability to relocate when disaster strikes. Entire communities and cultures are at risk of being lost to the perils of climate change. The natural resources that have sustained Indigenous peoples for centuries in forests, grasslands, rivers, coral reefs, and other natural habitats are being destroyed by extreme weather events and climatic shifts. Cultural traditions are being irrevocably altered in the face of climate change. Communities that have been marginalized throughout history face some of the most devastating impacts. We have a president who not only recognizes the inequities that exist, but who shows through action that we are ready to lead the world toward a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive future. Earlier this month, the Biden-Harris administration released our climate action plans. The Department of the Interior's plan centers on environmental justice, builds resilient communities, and invests in a clean energy future that could create millions of good-paying union jobs while protecting the community's natural and cultural resources on which we all rely. By taking bold action, we ensure that the World Heritage sites that this organization works so hard to raise awareness about and protect are preserved well into the future. It's a win-win. Not only do we create a more sustainable future full of opportunity for generations to come, but we also preserve the histories and memories of the generations that came before us. Together, our work will promote climate resilient lands, waters, and cultural resources, advance climate equity, transition to a resilient clean energy economy, support tribal and insular community resilience, empower the next generation of conservation and resilience workers, enhance climate literacy, and bolster climate resilience in the management of sites, facilities, and supply of products and services. This work will have a profound impact on the preservation of the 24 World Heritage sites in the United States. We also use tools like the Great American Outdoors Act to preserve and maintain these important sites. Excuse me. During my time as a member of the House Natural Resources Committee, I worked with my colleagues to pass this bill. Now, as Secretary of the Interior, I can put this law into action. For example, the Great American Outdoors Act Legacy Restoration Fund provides $8.2 million to stabilize the cliff that is part of the foundation of the San Fernando Bastion. The National Park Service also recently completed a $6 million multi-year construction project that repaired about a half a mile of historic masonry walls, including an original city gate on the west side of the city. When I visited Yellowstone National Park earlier this year, I saw the largest Legacy Restoration Fund project focused on historic preservation. We're investing $22.3 million to address deterioration of historic Fort Yellowstone. These investments are also funding the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center and Historic Architecture and Engineering Center so that we can develop preservation maintenance action teams. These teams will develop, coordinate, and deploy experienced personnel to address high priority deferred maintenance projects at small and medium parks, while introducing youth in underrepresented communities and veterans to the skills, knowledge, and opportunities in historic preservation. This is directly in line with President Biden's America the Beautiful initiative, which takes an inclusive and collaborative approach to conservation. Through it, the president is setting the first ever national goal to restore and conserve 30% of US lands and ocean by 2030. It is at its core a call to action for all of us to do more for the planet, for the economy, and for future generations. It's a vision that recognizes that nature offers some of the most cost-effective ways to address the climate crisis, that we need to do more to stem the steep loss of nature and wildlife, and that we need to address the inequitable access to outdoors for communities of color. It's about supporting locally led and voluntary efforts with ranchers and farmers and private landowners. It's about honoring tribal sovereignty and lifting up Indigenous-led conservation. It's about access to the outdoors for all communities, no matter their income, background, or where they live. And it's about using science and traditional knowledge to guide how we conserve, connect, and restore the lands, waters, and wildlife that we all depend on. It's incredibly exciting. The work that ICOMOS does to bring experts together in the name of conserving some of the most iconic heritage sites in the world can be a model that we're looking to embrace in America the Beautiful. We have our work cut out for us, but we can do hard things. Thank you so much for all you do. And know that as we take bold action to address the climate crisis, we're also thinking about that tremendous work and its impacts on the preservation of World Heritage sites, not just in the United States, but across the globe. I'm happy to now turn the mic over to my colleague, the Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Shannon Espinosa, who is a top-notch professional and leader in thinking through how we leverage available investments to make positive differences for many generations to come. Thank you so much. And Shannon, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you so much for those inspiring comments. And hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Espinosa. I am the Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks here at the Department of the Interior. And I'm glad to be with you, Douglas. I think I'm here for the discussion part of the agenda.
Yes, we would very much like to begin that now. I want to thank Secretary Haaland for her valuable time. It's always very inspirational to hear her talk, and she's saying what I think all of us at ICOMOS have in our hearts. So thank her so much. So we see now some questions in the chat. And perhaps we could just begin with that if that is agreeable to you. I don't know if you see those. So
I do, and I saw an excellent one about Indigenous knowledge. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that.
Love to talk about that. Absolutely love to talk about that. Something we're incredibly interested in and growing more interested in as we have conversations with keepers of Indigenous knowledge. I had a conversation with something called, in Australia, they have a Indigenous knowledge broker, which I think is a really interesting idea. Really interesting idea. It's full of ideas that have been floating around in my mind and just pulling them all together. But I don't want to talk anymore. I'll just ask you to comment on that. Yeah. Indigenous knowledge. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Douglas. And I think just to frame the question as the questioner has asked it, how can DOI utilize traditional ecological knowledge to address the impacts of climate change? So this is, I'm so grateful. I think Destry Jarvis asked this question. I'm so grateful for his having asked it because I, like you, Douglas, have been thinking a lot about this. And I think that it is not a simple question because in many ways we are circumscribed by the ways that we know things. And in the West, we have been taught to know things, through Western scientific knowledge. And that is, it's really one of the earliest areas of training that we received. I remember as a mom of young children, they did their first science fair projects when they were in kindergarten, 5 years old, where they learned the scientific method, and that sort of continued all the way through their formal education. And so we emerge from that with a certain way of knowing, and in many ways it hampers our ability to be open to the idea that there are other ways of knowing. It's not the only way to know. And so I think that that's a really important insight if we are going to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge at a deep level. Now, having said that, that shouldn't stop us from certainly low-hanging fruit opportunities to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge. And certainly the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service are doing some of that already. So for example, elk management at a place like Point Reyes National Seashore, and working with the local affiliated tribes there to think differently about our kind of knee-jerk reaction for lethal removal, and how managing elk, and even in cases of lethal removal, can be done in a way that is that feels more honorable, that feels more right, and do it in a way that is much more reflective of traditional ecological knowledge. And that whole approach now has been memorialized in a memorandum of understanding between the tribes and the Park Service. So that's a concrete example of how we can look for opportunities. Certainly our management of bison. This is an area that is, and you talk about a culturally significant species. We're already doing a lot in the area of bison management and, managing our cultural sites and our cultural resources as well. So but if we want to do it deeply, we also have to first kind of have that insight that there are more than one ways to know things. And, there are writers like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's been writing a lot about this. Her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is just such a wonderful, wonderful introduction to this idea for someone certainly like me. So I could spend 45 minutes talking about this topic alone, Douglas. So.
Yeah, I will say, I don't want to, take our time here, but I want to say two things. I'm a nerd. I mean, when I was in junior high school, they gave me these interest tests, and I was like 99% interested in science, to the extent that the counselor called me and said, "You're not interested in anything but science, and people just don't exist for you." But that's not true. I think what I've taken from these conversations is the concept of the relationship of humans in the natural world. For example, this idea of totems, and I've been an anthropologist. I think, why do all these people have to? Because they see their kinship network as extending to these animals and the natural world, the plants and animals. They're part of their family, and they feel the responsibility to take care of them. Now, that's not part of Western culture. That feeling, that obligation just isn't there. We've lost it somehow.
Yeah, and there's a concept of reciprocity, a relationship with the world that is based on reciprocity and not transactional sort of relationship. There's just a tremendous. I have every confidence that with the Secretary's leadership, the two bureaus that I'm responsible for. And I'm already seeing it, are going to start really thinking expansively about this topic.
Yeah. A lot can be done. We have so much to learn. I realize it myself. There's just so much, because you go to school and they don't teach you this. And it's really why we're in such major trouble. We don't feel responsible in the way that people have traditionally felt responsible for everything in their environment. That's my impression. We have a lot to learn. So, and I'll let you talk. I'm sorry.
I just maybe we'll turn back to the Q&A. And I noticed there was a Q&A about DOI's climate action plan.
Yeah.
What are the main objectives? Also a wonderful question. So those main objectives include promoting climate resilient lands, waters, and cultural resources, advancing climate equity, transitioning to a resilient clean energy economy, supporting tribal and insular community resilience, which is a very big topic, particularly for our island nations, and empowering the next generation of conservation and resilience workers. So this is a workforce that emerges from our conservation and resilient economy. So very, very ambitious goals and objectives, but we have a president and a secretary who have invited us to be and expect us to be ambitious in this area.
That is encouraging, absolutely encouraging. Very happy to see that.
All right. So should we just keep going to the question and answers?
Yeah,
questions?
Yeah, if you don't mind, sure.
Okay, I see here, can DOI and PS make a poster child example of San Juan National Historical Park in addressing the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, and extreme storms, at the only masonry fort in the US that is a World Heritage Site. What a wonderful question. I'm so pleased that the great work there is being highlighted. And I mean, I think the short answer is absolutely. I think this is, we need to be talking about, and we are trying to talk about the importance of making capital investments in climate resilience, particularly when it comes to historic structures and our cultural sites. And, the good news is that we have a bigger toolbox to use now with the Great American Outdoors Act that the Secretary touched upon in her remarks. I think that the investment that the United States Congress has laid out for us there, nearly $6 billion of investment over 5 years, the vast majority of that being targeted at the National Park Service. I think we're going to see more work like we've seen in San Juan National Historical Park. So thank you for that question. Let's see. I'm not taking these in order, and I so apologize for it. Let's see. There are recent press reports that the U.S. might rejoin UNESCO. Could you comment on this? I know what you know, which is what I've seen in the press, and I'm afraid I can't comment beyond that. But I feel that if a conversation is unfolding, eventually the National Park Service and DOI will be folded into a conversation that I assume will include the Congress and the Department of State as well. So that's a sort of a non-answer, but I'm afraid all I can say about that. How is the Department of the Interior focusing on activating nature-based solutions that also respect cultural heritage as we fund important works? Goodness gracious, this is a really good question. So nature-based solutions, obviously, sort of an incredibly important portfolio of opportunity, of solution opportunity. That is a solution set that the administration and secretary myself are very interested in developing nature-based solutions. For those of you who I don't know, who I think is most of everyone here, my career has been spent heretofore restoring America's Everglades, including World Heritage Site Everglades National Park. And that is a nature-based solution, restoring flow through, the massive Everglades ecosystem. I will say that I experienced in that work, tension's not the right word, conflict sometimes, that we had to engineer around between cultural artifacts, cultural resources, and nature-based solutions. So I think a commitment to work, what I found doing that work on the ground was that it was very hands-on work. It was very site-specific work. We were able to engineer around many of those conflicts. There are other tools in the toolbox for working through where those conflicts occur. And so it's not an either or in my experience, usually. And having just an honest commitment to preserving cultural heritage and cultural resources while we're pursuing and doing a very thorough job of assessing those potential impacts and committing to working through them. I think as we pursue nature-based solutions, I think that's the key. You just got to have the folks on the ground who are willing to work through those issues. All right. Well, this is a long question. Let's see here. This is about 30 by 30. So the fact that the U.S. has signed on to the 30 by 30 protected area target is an enormously important and encouraging development. However, in many parts of the world, Indigenous peoples organizations have raised concerns that these area-based targets will lead to fortress conservation and land grabs by governments. I'm optimistic that the situation can be different in the U.S. Under the Secretary's leadership. How will we avoid these concerns and reinforce Indigenous stewardship and relationships to it? And so, look, this is a really great question. The president has endorsed the goals of 30 by 30 under his umbrella program, America the Beautiful, or I would call it his umbrella vision. America the Beautiful isn't a program, and I think that's an important part of answering this question. It is a goal. It is a national objective. It's a goal line, if you will. And within that America the Beautiful vision includes kind of the how we want to pursue the 30 by 30 goal. And it includes a heavy emphasis in tribal engagement, a heavy emphasis in tribal-led conservation. For our administration, America the Beautiful and the 30 by 30 objective is one that will work when it comes from the ground up, and when we lift up the efforts of local communities, tribal communities, states, landowners to join hands and pursue the objective together. And again, drawing on my experience in the Everglades. So in the United States, in the eastern part of the United States, the federal government doesn't own a lot of land. There's not a very heavy federal land ownership east of the United States. So if you want to, east of the Mississippi, if you want to do conservation in the East, you have to do it in partnership. You have to do it in ways that protect things that are of ultimate value, like cultural resources. So we have that capacity to do it. I know from my experience, it can be done. And that's really our vision for the United States' approach to 30 by 30. Ground up, voluntary, tribally led, locally led, state led, federal government there to lift up those efforts, support them, and leverage them.
I have a kind of who do you have in mind to do this? I mean, I was with the Park Service, and actually, we're not perfect by any means, but we try, okay? And one of the things that's very successful is these, identifying stakeholders and bringing them in for meetings and trying to listen. They used to teach us to listen. We had to go to classes to stop talking and start listening. So I'm just curious about do you have a cadre of people, or do you have people in mind that might engage on that local level and listen and record and all of that sort of thing? I'm just curious if you've gone that far.
Oh, absolutely, Douglas. So it's a good question. So the President's America the Beautiful initiative is an all of government initiative. And so it's not just DOI, it's USDA, it's DOT, it's, agencies that have an effect on the land and on our waters. It's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's, and it is an all of government, and it is an all hands on deck approach. And so the great sort of tool that we have in the toolbox at DOI is we have so much capacity already out on the landscape, out in the country, and who are already doing this work. As you mentioned, Douglas, they're already doing this work. National parks and national park units, for example, are already sort of anchors of local economies. They're amenities of states. They are already, many of them, beloved places that can become a locus of, additional conservation. But it's not just national parks. There are national wildlife refuges. There are BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, has a great deal of land, particularly out west. And that's just the federal lands piece. There are state parks. There are state conservation areas. There are tribal lands where, the tribes are working on conserving and protecting lands under their governance. How can we join hands to make those visions reality? That's really what, the America the Beautiful plan seeks to do.
That's terrific. But just to say, it's hard to learn how to listen. It was for me, I guess. I mean, because we're so used to talking and coming in, we're the United States government and we're only here to help. And if you just don't if you learn to listen, it makes a big difference. You may not like what they're saying for a while, but you listen and you acknowledge, and something comes out of that. So I don't know. I'm just thinking about that, the training that might accompany that effort. I'm just thinking about that.
We have a lot of competence now, but you're right. Always growing that competence and those competencies, and it's up to leadership in our agencies, right, to support that kind of work, and to where it's happening, to lift it up and to encourage more of it. And so we're really working on doing that. I have a question here in the chat that's about DOI and FEMA providing solutions, tools, and partnerships that encourage and support local emergency managers to elevate the importance of natural and cultural resource protection and operational priorities when preparing and responding to disasters. Another outstanding question. This is quite a learned and experienced audience, Douglas. I'm not sure I have a super satisfying answer here, except to say that, we would go back to nature-based solutions, nature-based resilience, and the acknowledged tension that can happen between pursuing nature-based solutions and preserving cultural resources. And I do think that, FEMA is another agency that has an impact that most folks don't realize they do. And it goes to this all of government approach where it's just absolutely critical. And the fact that I can't underscore the significance of this 30 by 30 America the Beautiful vision coming from the president, because it is a call to all of the agencies that are in the executive branch that they must work together and they must, row in the same direction on this one. And that goes for FEMA. We at DOI have, I think, a really good relationship, again, drawing from my own experience in a very vulnerable coastal area, South Florida, just a couple of feet in the southern part, just a couple of feet above sea level, incredibly vulnerable. Worked very closely with FEMA, both to prepare for and recover from disaster. And I think the trick here is to make sure that FEMA has the toolbox that they need and has the close working relationships with resource agencies like ours to make sure that we're connected throughout the entire preparation and recovery process when it comes to disasters.
Okay. Do we
have one more question, I think?
Great. Let's see.
All right.
Please.
So it says here regarding, staying on the 30 by 30 theme, the focus seems to be on natural landscapes and incorporating Indigenous voices. Is there room to expand the 30 by 30 framework to include cultural landscapes like the Greater Chaco cultural landscape? I think the short answer is yes. And I think the important thing here, you've used the word landscape twice. I was giving an internal talk yesterday. What America the Beautiful invites us to do is to think at the landscape scale. And when you zoom out, when America the Beautiful says zoom out, and when you zoom out, you recognize a lot. You recognize watersheds, you recognize ecosystems, you recognize wildlife corridors, you recognize cultural landscapes. When you are zoomed in on a specific protected area, which it's important for us to do that, there's no question about it. We have to act at that smaller scale. But you can miss the larger contextual scale that is so important, both for natural systems and for preserving cultural heritage. So America the Beautiful is a fantastic framework that forces us to zoom out. And when we do, we see so much more. And I think the opportunities will start to emerge both on the natural system side and on the cultural landscape side, on the cultural heritage side, I should say. So.
In remote sensing, we call that the synoptic perspective.
You know what? You are a geek, Douglas. You were right.
I just tingle when I say that word.
Well, it's been such a delight joining you today, and I'm sorry that we're out of time, but on behalf of the Secretary, I just want, again, to thank you so much for inviting both of us to participate, and just to reiterate everything that she said in terms of our commitment to protect our cultural heritage and to lift up Indigenous voices and to protect our natural landscapes, and to thank everyone that's on this call for everything that you all do to lift up this work as well.
Just
thank
let
you.
us know how we can help. And thank you. This is so refreshing. You've said so much. It's very valuable and very clear. I appreciate it deeply, and I'm sure everybody in ICOMOS and all the other folks that are listening, we really appreciate this. We appreciate your time, your ideas, your commitment, and your path forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.